Hey, so here is Python in the built environment. So recently, in the last 2 weeks or 2 weeks or so, the last few weeks have been a blur, but I was actually at the AGC Missouri conference, or it's called DCTC, Design Construction Technology Conference. And I was there a couple weeks ago, and it was my first presentation I've ever done for something like that. And it was a lot of fun, and I won't go through the presentation today, like through this, but I wanted to briefly kind of go through it. I think my channel, we talk about a lot of this stuff, and so I don't necessarily want to present this today, but I want to show you guys the GitHub and then briefly kind of run through the PowerPoint, because I'm going to make all of that available for you so you can just use it, to help your firm or to help you in whatever you're working on. So before I show the presentation, and again, I won't go through all of it. I think they recorded it, so if I find that, I will post it, but my goal here is just to show you guys, and then you can use it if you want. So the DCTC conference, I've got a repo up here, and you'll actually find the exact PowerPoint I'm going to show you today, and also all the example files. So there's these two, and I guess some disclaimers or not, I don't know, just information on this. This example here, I can't share like the calculator that we use because that's proprietary to the company for the duct loss calculator, but I do share the RVT, which is just a sample model. There's nothing special about that, but I do share the DYN so that you can play around with that and use it. The BIM Spin example, that is I think pretty cool, but again, I had to use special like dashboards for it. I couldn't use the exact dashboards I actually use, because though the information and data is sensitive, and I couldn't share that data, and so I created a fake data set and then shared that instead. Now, it's not as robust as the one that I talked about, but I think it still kind of shows the importance of looking at data and leveraging it within your firm. I did share this MP4, which is it's a video in the PowerPoint, but it does show some of the actual dashboard. It's just got some of the values and stuff blurred out. I tend to lean on the safe side when it comes to sharing data. Anytime I'm working with employee data or financial data, I tend to keep that just secure. I do not want to accidentally share things that are sensitive or just probably things that should be just private. So I won't share those, but you will find, again, samples that you can mess around with. And I also shared the Python code, so you can play around with that. The other one's visualization class data, and that's got some sample data in it. It's also got a Jupyter notebook, some Python that you can use as well. So we've got the PowerPoint here. That's what we're going to look at today. And then there is a Python script here, and that's actually for and I'll show you, I think it's pretty cool. Before we jump into the presentation, I wanted to mention this because I saw this today. So David Butts, I think, is somebody you should definitely follow if you're interested in MEP related things within Revit and just technology. He does, I think, like this post in itself can be applied to architecture. So it's not just architecture, but I think it check out his blog, see if you like it and it's helpful. I find a lot of good stuff in it, and I saw it today, and I just wanted to make sure to share it with folks, because it's a really great resource, and I think it'll help people. So this post here, he's talking about Revit categories within components, and talking a bit about some of their visibility properties, and how there's different category types or object style categories. And I think it's a good read overall. It's not terribly complicated, so I think it's something you can share with your designers as well. Anyways, back to this. I'm going to minimize this, and then here's the presentation. It is 56 slides. That's why I don't want to go through it today. But I still wanted to kind of show it to you guys. Let me see if I can switch the display. There it goes. So I did spend a lot of time on this. There were some lessons learned. I think I would have spent more time just preparing a few areas, making sure I really nailed down the code when I was explaining some of the Python. Like, I built it, I understood it, but then when you're looking at it on a big screen, you're like, hold a minute, is that what that does? And does this do that? And I think I could have prepared a bit better. So there was a few lessons learned from my first presentation, but I think overall it was a really good experience. I definitely recommend, if you're in Missouri, Kansas, over there in the Midwest, you're close to this conference, check it out. I think it's a wonderful conference. They spent I think a lot of time organizing it. It's only a day long, but I think it was, there was a lot of benefit from it, from just that day. And I think there were some conversations around making it 2 days. So if you happen to be in the area, I would recommend checking that out. I think it's once a year. So Google it and look into it. Totally recommend. It was my first time going, and I loved it. So introductions, so nothing really to talk about there. Class goals, I wanted to inspire the group. I wanted to show like real examples, because at least for me, I personally find that you could show me something all day, but until I get into it and leverage it, even if I get into the, say it's an example project, a lot of Python courses or Dynamo courses will walk you through a project, you're done with it, which is wonderful, but at least personally, I don't retain a lot of that information. The point where I really retain it is when I'm applying that in a practical way on a project. And so my goal was to have people walk away from this with inspired, or to have the ability to think about or to look at problems within their firm, look at their tools that they're using, look at some of the tedious problems that they're running into, look at some of the data that's available, and then say, hey, maybe I can use Python to help me here. So my goal isn't necessarily to give them, all the knowledge for how to program in Python, but more, how do I find those practical solutions within the firm so I can start to apply it myself. And so that's why, to me, showing how I use Python in an actual firm, I think is really important. Because even though the examples I show don't directly translate maybe to another firm, maybe it's a construction firm or an architecture firm, I work in an engineering firm, I still think there's things that you can extract from these ideas and apply them in your own ways in your own firm. So here's the agenda. So what is Python? Why does it matter? And then I've got 3 examples, and then wrap up and resources. I think there's a lot of things I would like to improve on this course or this class. I would like to evolve this and maybe present it again. I did have a lot of fun developing this and putting it together. So what is Python? Some quick notes there. I didn't stick on this too much because it isn't a Python course. Why does it matter? So some high-level things, and then I kind of explained a few more things and had some examples. And then I thought this was cool. This is not a real chart, so that's why there's no reference to any link or anything. It is Python popularity, and I created this in Python, and I did that to just for fun, to show that there's so many things you can do with this tool. Like you can use it to make these visuals, you can use it in Revit, you can use it in Dynamo. There's so many ways that you can apply this tool, and having that knowledge is incredibly valuable. And then here's the code. Let me go back to that. So here's the code. It's in Jupyter. I didn't talk about this, and there is a reference to this code in the PowerPoint on how to write this. Or sorry, not the PowerPoint, in the Jupyter Notebook that's associated with the GitHub. In GitHub, you can open up the Jupyter Notebook, and there's a link to the actual article that talks about this code. I did change a few things to create it to make this visual, but there is a resource for that in the Jupyter Notebook. So here's the actual statistics. Now this is, I can't remember, this is like the TIOB or TOOB or something, and then there's the PyPL index. I can't remember which one's what, but you can see Python's pretty high up on that list, JavaScript and some others. There's no notes here, but essentially the reason why I was bringing this up is I'm like, the community is a really important aspect to Python. When you're trying to do something, typically there's something in Stack Overflow. Somebody has posted something, they've already done it, or there's a package or a library that you can leverage to do what you're trying to do. And so that's what I was trying to highlight here. Popularity isn't everything, but the huge community behind Python and all the incredible things out there makes just developing really cool applications so much easier, because you can reference, a library that somebody's already created. Here's some examples. I'm not going to go into this stuff. If you want to play around with it, for sure, check it out. But essentially what this does is we've got a Dynamo script. So we've got a calculator. It is something that our engineers have worked really hard to develop. And what we've done is we've got a Dynamo script. I created this Dynamo script to pull out certain parameters that they would use in this calculator. And then that calculator would do the rest of, whatever they need. I'm not a mech engineer. I'm not going to pretend to be one. But I know that this is data they need to put in there. And that what they would do typically is manually go through Revit. Now, I'm sure you're asking like, oh, why don't you just do this in Revit? Well, there's some barriers to that. A lot of engineers are hesitant in using Revit because they see it as a black box. We're looking into how to make that better. There's also a barrier to how making sure people are modeling things appropriately. So this kind of meets people in the middle. It says, hey, we can use Revit and we can use automation to help your process, but let's support each other and move to the direction of getting everybody into Revit. It's one step at a time. It's let me automate a portion of your it's not the best process, but let me automate a portion of it, and then our long-term goal is maybe to get into Revit. So that's kind of the story or what I talked about. Can we automate this? And then I do talk about what is duct pressure loss. I was told this is not a good definition, but if you actually look at the notes in the PowerPoint, you will find two different definitions from two mechanical engineers. Check that out, and if you want to learn more about duct pressure loss, but I'm not somebody that can teach you that. I don't know that very well. So here is just looking at the code. I'm not presenting this currently, so I'm not going to go through these, but I want to show you guys this for your own presentations. I think this is really cool. So you can see here I've got 1, 2, 3. You can see if I kind of move over, I will hover over. It changes the mouse icon. Now, if I come up here and click on that, now that I'm zoomed in, if I click here again, you'll see this pops up, and then I'll transition and you'll see I zoom in, and then I can start to talk about the code. I thought that was really cool. I think about a year ago or so, I found out you could do that with PowerPoint. So you can create some really cool interactive presentations. So I found it really cool. There's some good resources on LinkedIn Learning. I think it kind of makes the presentation a bit more interesting, and so that's it. I just wanted to kind of share that, and you can see I walk through the code. I did kind of question the group before the presentation to try to gauge where everybody was at, and I kind of felt it was mixed. There were some folks that were wanting to learn it. There was some individuals that knew Python very well, and then I think the bulk of the class was folks that didn't really use it at all. Very minimum, technology use. So I tried to skim over a lot of the code, and again, just focus on the goal of making sure it's like if you have somebody within your firm that can leverage this, talk to them when you see these automation opportunities like this duct. This duct scenario, which I didn't mention, it was taking a designer on larger projects multiple weeks to input all that information in a calc. Now we can do it in a matter of minutes for each. So a matter of minutes for each system. I don't want to exaggerate it. So it would still take an hour or so, but it doesn't take weeks. There's still some tedious work involved, but not at all to the extent of what they were doing before. So you can see here there's 2. Again, it's the same thing except for we don't walk through the code. If we come over here, same thing. So you can that's a basic example, but you can do some really cool things with that zoom in, zoom out functionality within PowerPoint. I keep wanting to say Power BI, but in PowerPoint, you could do some really cool stuff in it. So if I remember, or if you comment and remind me, because I'll probably forget, there's some really good courses on LinkedIn, and I can't remember the presenter, but he's really awesome, and I watch a lot of his stuff when it comes to PowerPoint, but I'll share that if I remember after this video. Actionable takeaways, I wanted to share a couple. That's not that important, but I wanted to really make sure people knew, like, here's a practical example. Maybe here's some things that you can do when you get back to your firm. BIM Spent, I think this is really cool. This was something I worked on. So I work at Henderson, which is Henderson Engineers, which I shared before in the introduction slide, but I started within the operations side and then moved over to the retail sector, and that's a pretty large sector, and they have lots of people on that sector, and they have lots of data. And so a big thing for me, being new to that sector, was to understand where BIM was at. And so we could actually figure out who was using Revit and who was using AutoCAD on our projects. We call them programs, which are clients, but who's using AutoCAD, who's using Revit for those programs, so that we can start to understand how do we move from CAD to Revit, and then, you know, continue to push that forward within the sector, and then hopefully support the overall firm's direction for going towards Revit. Oh, and let me go back to that. I didn't talk about any of these points, but you can see help guide us our decisions. So that's another thing. When we help a program transition from CAD to Revit, we actually have that data and we can start to track it over time with labor codes and certain data points to understand if we made a good decision. Are we moving in the right direction? Why is our profitability not going up after we've made this transition, after we went through the hurdle of training people? Things like that, you know, KPIs essentially. Here's an example, and you can see I've got things blurred out. Now, in our sector, we've got multiple practices. We've got 6 in total. Overhead is not one of them, but that is a cost, but that's not important for this dashboard. At least for my use, it isn't. And you can see what we have here is practice name. We have automotive, automotive, general merch, grocery, etc. And then over here to the right, you can see software, AutoCAD, Revit, and then BIM spent is how much total spent has that practice, and that's what we call them as practices, like automotive is a practice. How much money did they spend on these specific labor codes? The labor codes we're looking at are labor codes that are focused on things that you would typically associate to production work related to CAD and Revit type things. And so we tried to gather those labor codes to come up with a number on how we were working in CAD and Revit. And you can see over here to the right, we're using more Revit. We're spending more money on Revit than we are on AutoCAD. That's because a lot of CAD projects are small churn and burns. They're very quick. And then you can see here it kind of goes really down at the end. That's because the data isn't there. But that'll change if we were to, you know, pull off that last month. We were in that current month, and so it dropped off dramatically there. Down here you can see project number by software, so we can see how many project numbers are associated to Revit and AutoCAD. And then also BIM spent, so we can see, you know, how many millions of dollars we spent on Revit and AutoCAD. And over to the right we can see the actual operations, which mean how many times have they opened or saved a Revit or a CAD project over a 1-year period. Or since August 2021, and then that's what you see there. This part is actually so this is Power BI, incredibly powerful, recommend checking it out. The part that we use Python for is actually figuring out what a Revit or AutoCAD project is. And this is the video here. You can see it's interactive. If you haven't used Power BI before, 100% recommend it. It's got a huge community behind it. And it's really easy to use. If you've got data and you've got different sources you want to connect, you can do it really easy in Power BI. I'm not kidding you. I didn't get into Power BI because I worked with a lot of folks that used it. At my current firm, we don't use it as often, and I found a really good use for like this example and some other ones. And I was like, all right, well, I'll give it a shot. I got into it, and within a few months I was doing some really incredible things. Within just the first dashboard I was doing incredible things, but I started to learn more, and I was like, oh, I could use it for this, I could use it for that. So totally recommend just giving it a shot. If you've got data and you want to share it with people, this is incredible. This is much easier to understand for executives, for designers. When you're trying to highlight a certain thing within a sector, you can say, hey, it looks like we're primarily using CAD for this group, or they're doing this, or profitability isn't up. I mean, you can really highlight those things in a tool like this that you can't do with like an Excel document, you know, a huge just database. It's just not as clear for everybody. Here's that just playing again. See if I can get out of this. This pop-up here just points out that you can actually use Python within Power BI. And I've got other examples at the end of it. This is where I talk about how do we figure out what projects are CAD to Revit. So real brief, because I'm not going to go through all of this, but real brief, we track who's opening, saving, and whatnot in Revit and CAD. And so what we can do is look at those opens and saves, and because they're opening and saving a project that's related to a certain project folder, we can actually figure out what project that they're saving those files for, and then try to quantify that and then make somewhat of a assumption on if they're using Revit or CAD. As an example, if they've opened 10 Revits and 1 CAD, and they've saved, you know, this many and that, you know, 10, they've saved Revit 10 times, they saved CAD 1 time, then we can make a good assumption that this is probably a Revit project. And then essentially set that project as a Revit project. And then this goes into some of that detail, so you can see here's the data. So project software, that's custom data that we use Python for. There's project number, there's software. If we look here, software usage, this is the data I was talking about where we track that. This is a sample data, and I do share that with people. So you've got James, Brett, Braden, and Kavita. And then you've got, okay, they've opened it 3 times Revit and AutoCAD for that particular project number. Okay, 3-1. Boom. Okay, that's a Revit project. It's not perfect, and there's other variables involved in that decision making, but essentially that's how it works. And then here's the code for that. This uses SQL, and it reaches into SQL. I share all the code except for the SQL credentials. Those are private. Obviously, this is a very specific instance, or a specific application of something like this. But there are a lot of firms that track that kind of data. And in my case, we had the data, but we weren't using it very much. And because of Power BI and Python, we are able to figure this stuff out and then have it almost as a KPI for us. Here's a simplistic version of that dashboard. This is what I shared with some sample data. Again, because of the data associated to the original dashboard, I can't share that, but I did take the time to create this so that you guys can play around with that. And so, interestingly, this data, at least the project numbers, was generated with Python. It was using fake data, or Faker was the library. So Faker was able to generate, and you can see here, fake data.random number, and then 10 for the length of that number, and then we can generate 1,544 numbers. And then this software, like AutoCAD Revit, was just randomized. So Faker did generate the project numbers. So again, you know, this is like the whole reason behind this presentation to show all these different examples of how you can use Python and how it's so incredible to know this. And you know, it's like the barrier to use this compared to like C++ or like something crazy as assembly is so much lower, where it's still reasonable for you to know Python and be an expert designer or an expert, you know, BIM technologist person, whatever it is. You could learn this without having to spend years dedicated to it. I mean, I don't want to mitigate it and say that there's no barrier. It does take time, but it's not a ton. Like, you're not gonna have to pick and, like, do I learn Python, or do I, you know, need, or do I pick design? Do I pick BIM or do I pick Python? You don't have to make those decisions. Here's the last one. I wrote an article on this, and I think it is in this PowerPoint somewhere. Actually, no, it's not, because I've got the notes next to me. But it's on my LinkedIn. If you want it, just send me a message or just search my LinkedIn. You'll find the article. But it talks about understanding clashes, and then I talk about the Python and some of the stuff. But this was more or less just to show another example of how you can use various tools together, like Revit, Navis, Dynamo, Excel, and Python to better understand your processes, to better understand your data. Something important to me is Navis and coordination. It's incredibly valuable, but can you prove that to me? And for me personally, when it comes to pushing tools like that, I want to understand, okay, we've got all this data. Can we use it to make us better? Can we use it to help the designers make better decisions so that they're not wasting time coordinating a bunch of clashes that don't mean anything? And then also, does the effort that they're doing make a difference? I think these are all really important questions when it comes to managing technology in general. It's like, do we have KPIs? Do we have ROIs? Are we looking at the data, and are we actually making a difference for the firm, and for the business? And data is a good, Python, Power BI, all those tools, Dynamo can help you understand that stuff better. But essentially, this example is looking at clash data. Can we find, density, high density areas that we need to focus on before we focus on low density areas? And then even further, it's like, what are the clashes that are coordination issues or clashes that we get most RFIs on? What are things like that that can really drive the value of implementing a tool like this? And a tool, I mean Navisworks. Understanding that data is so important. And then here's just a cool GIF of just highlighting over some of the stuff. All that code and the example files are in the GitHub if you want to check it out. There's also an article if you want to check that out on my LinkedIn. This is an actionable takeaway. You can say I just put one. I think I could have put more, but I think by the time I got to this, I was just like, I was just really tired. Wrap up and resources. Do you need to learn code? I added this kind of late in creating this presentation, but I wanted to make sure, because it's been something I've been consistent with my entire career, is I don't believe you do need to learn code. I see a lot of people push it, but I spend a lot of time in code and can tell you that there's some amazing tools that can do some incredible things. Maybe it isn't as flexible, but do you really need it to be? Can't you just use this tool and be okay with that? Tools like Dynamo, tools like Nime, tools like Power Automate. These are low-code tools, and Power Automate's like a no-code that you could use to make your life better and easier and more efficient and effective. And that's where I'm like, I don't think everybody needs to learn to code. There's a benefit in being an expert in design, but there's no way you can be an expert in software development, every programming language, and be an expert architect, on top of that, an expert engineer. But I think you can leverage these no-code environments, like there's no-code environments for machine learning, there's no-code environments for all sorts of things, where you can leverage the expertise of those industries without being an expert yourself. Now, obviously, to take the next level, then there's a much bigger investment, but that's maybe when you come to a point where you consider hiring somebody to fill that gap or fill that need. Somebody that is dedicated to that that specialty. So that's my thought. I love code. I think you should try to learn it. But if it's like, hey, I love design and I just want to automate a few things, well, maybe just knowing Dynamo and how to plug in some nodes is good enough, or how to use Power Automate to automate some of your emails or some of your Trello tasks or some of your planner tasks. You know, maybe that's it. So here's some visual low code, no code tools. Dynamo, obviously, and then we've got Nime, which is a machine learning. I think they say on their website like data analytics. I can't remember, but machine learning data analytics platform, really awesome, open source. Check that out. I think it's really cool. And then Power Automate, which is, let me go back to that. That's a Microsoft tool, so definitely recommend checking that out. I actually use that a ton. I don't use it as much anymore, but I think I could. I just have not found the time to get back into that tool. But I used to use it to automate various tasks, or you could even use it to watch folders. Like, I was a manager of the Navisworks like templates and stuff, and so I have set up an alert to watch those folders. If anybody added anything, it would send me alerts, and then I would just go in there and check. I don't know if I really needed that. None of that stuff was that important, but you can set up things like that. Where can you use Python? So throughout this entire presentation, I tried to show various ways you can leverage Python, like through Power BI. I showed that example, and then I showed like Jupyter Notebook, Dynamo, and then here are just some other examples. So Dynamo, Nime, Excel. Nime has a Python. I think they've always had like a Python node or something. But now you can actually create your own nodes using Python, kind of like your own custom nodes. And then we've got the like SQL, you can use Python. Grasshopper has Python. Power BI, like we saw before. Excel. There's just a lot of ways you can interact with different tools, and a lot of tools can be extended with Python. There's many, many more that I did not list here. And then I wanted to show some resources. Python Tutor, amazing. I wish I knew this tool when I first started learning, because it actually explains what's going on. It's actually really cool. I don't know why I didn't see it before or learn about it before, but I think it's an amazing resource for people that are learning Python for the first time, or even now, like if you're trying to understand, you know, more advanced things. I haven't tried that in that tutor tool, but it's worth a shot to see if it can help you. LinkedIn Learning, Python Quick Start. This course is taught by a woman, and her name, I can't remember, I'm blanking on it right now, but it's only an hour long, hour and 36 minutes. I really enjoy this course. You can get LinkedIn Learning free from your library sometimes. Also, your work may have it. If they don't have it, a lot of times you can ask for it and say, hey, can we, you know, find a budget for this or whatnot. And then if not, the last thing is you could pay for it. It's $30 a month. You could do the trial and quit. I don't know if they do trials, but do it for a month. But I thought this class was really, really good because it's brief. It gets straight to the point. It talks about really just the basics, and I think gives you a really good foundation to start your Python career off of. And then last is Code Wars. So just like this entire presentation, it focuses on practical examples. Well, here I use Code Wars. I love it. I think I've done 100+ challenges. I haven't had as much time to get into it as I wish I did, but it's an amazing resource because it gives you these example problems that you can solve. It's a free tool. You can pay for it. I think I pay, but it's not very expensive, and it gives you some other functionality. And because I have learned so much from it, I feel like I don't have any problem paying for it, but it is free though. So that I think is a really good benefit. But it gives you an example. You have these different challenges. I think 8 Caillou is the easiest, 1 Caillou is the hardest, and you kind of just choose your language and then the challenge you want to do, and then you try it. And then I find it to be fun because when you succeed and it takes you, if it accepts your code, that just feels really nice. So you feel accomplished after it, and then obviously you gain the benefit of learning and doing these challenges, because at some point you'll be able to apply it in a practical sense on a project. So anyways, love this tool. And then lastly, I just mentioned my GitHub, LinkedIn, and then YouTube, and that's it. So I think that took me a little bit longer than I expected, but hopefully this was helpful for you. Remember, the GitHub's out there if you want to mess with any of these examples. The presentation's out there if you want to take it and tweak it and make it your own. I don't care. Use it. And then my YouTube, obviously you know where that is because you're watching this video. But if you haven't checked out my LinkedIn, check that out. And then I always forget to mention this, but I've got a Discord server, and check that out. There's a really good community there, a lot of cool people. Check that out if you want to ask questions or have conversations about tech. And yeah, that's all I got today. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe, like it, share it, whatever, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks.